This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we're delighted to have Jonathan Kellerman and his son, Jesse Kellerman, with us this evening. They're going to be talking about the brand new book, The Lost Coast. And we have some books that Jonathan has signed. Someday we'll get Jesse back out and he can sign them too at some point. I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field should you wish to purchase one of these. And also, if you have questions for Jonathan or Jesse, go ahead and type them in, and Barbara will bring me on screen towards the end of the hour. I'd be happy to ask any of your questions. So, Barbara, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, gentlemen, it is not publication day. It's one day later, but I am prepared to drink you a toast. So
I'm tempted, but
day, right.
I have nothing here.
Look at it that way. And also, I'm drinking an early toast to Jonathan, who has a birthday coming up. So
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara.
My pleasure. Now, why has Jesse not signed our books, you ask? And Jesse says that he has a great story to tell about why his creative life has been somewhat derailed. So, Jesse, tell us about the twins.
Well, we were talking before we came online. We were talking. So the context you need is that we have 2.5-year-old twins. They're our fourth and fifth children, and they were, as many twins are, a surprise. And Barbara asked before we came online, were they a surprise? And I said, well, it's a funny story. We went to the OB for our first sonogram. It was quite early. It was maybe 9 weeks or something like that. And this was in the middle of, it was still COVID. So we went to the office and the doctor's wearing a mask, and then there's a nurse in the room. She's wearing a mask and I'm wearing a mask. And the doctor put the sonogram up on the screen, and I saw her turn white above the mask, like from here on up, just all the blood drained from her face. And she turned to me and she said, "Do you see what I see?" And not being an OB, I said, "Yeah, sure. Yeah. See, there's the baby and there's the placenta." And she said, "No, there's the baby and there's the baby." And all my hair stood on end and my soul left my body. And I turned to the nurse who was standing there and I said, "We already have 3 children." And the nurse screamed. She literally let out a blood curdling, and I'm like, no one is making me feel better here. No one is being reassuring. Everybody is telling me to panic. So it was just a moment of real fight or flight for me.
Yeah, because they called us the first time before I think that was the second sonogram. Was that the first one? I think it was the second one. So they called us the first time, "Mom, Dad, we're having a healthy baby. We're so happy, blah, 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 blah." I said, "Great." Then a week later, they have this deer in the headlights look, and they go, "There was one hiding behind the other."
Everything changed. Everything changed. 2.5 years, or almost 3.5 years after that, everything is fine, and we've totally adjusted. But it was quite a rough way to get that piece of news.
I can imagine. So anyway, John, being an experienced and extremely kind parent, said to me, "I'll just sign the books this time."
Yeah.
I think that's enough.
Well, we raised 4, and that was a lot of children, and so they have 5, and I mean the twins are really cute. They're adorable, but I think having twins like having 4. There's so much work. So much work.
Yes, Jesse and I were also, we were talking about that. We have twin puppies that we adopted. They are now
That's a little easier.
And there's a voice from one of the puppies. And we were talking about the fact that puppies they're always together. They're always rolling around with each other, or they're sometimes fighting, sometimes loving, or sometimes crashing. But they're always together. Yeah. It's amazing.
Well, the quintessential stress and anxiety for children below the age of 6. I'm calling upon my previous profession as
Dr. Kellerman,
child clinical psychologist, is separation anxiety, and that's why it's hard to get kids to sleep, because being alone is really scary. And twins never experience that. It's a 24/7 play date. They never have that aloneness.
Right.
And I don't know if that's part of it, but these 2 guys are always happy. They just seem very unanxious about anything.
But. Well, it is interesting in that we have an anxious older dog, a rescue dog, who is now
rescues.
We'll get off the meds here in a minute, but she's actually now taking veterinarian prescribed CBC, and it has really calmed her down.
Wow.
Yeah.
But she never feels safe, to Jonathan's point.
Yeah.
Where's the puppies? You know, it's just the world's a carnival, whatever. If we get tired of them, we just throw them out, which you can't do with children. I said to Jesse, puppies are easier in that sense. You just throw them aside.
We have a rescue dog now who I refer to as our fifth child who doesn't talk back.
There she is. She's in
And
back.
there she is. She walked in on cue. Look at
Yeah.
that. She's so smart. Hello, Colette. Come here. And she also, because she's a rescue dog, she was, you know, she had a hard beginning. She hates to be alone. She hates to be alone.
Well, and the thing is, they can't tell you what their trauma is.
Yeah.
You know, so
I could usually, well, being alone is definitely part of it. She does not like it. If we ever leave, she yells at us when we, you know, she goes,
well, currently she's ensconced on the couch behind you.
There
so
she is.
Really happy
It's
there.
funny she came in right on cue. That was
I know, it was fabulous.
She's a genius.
A little white dog with a white tail, just like one of ours.
Exactly.
So I probably should have made, you know, some complex introduction. I sort of assumed that everybody watching this actually knows who Jonathan is, because he is, you know, #1 New York Times bestseller. He's won all kinds of awards. He's written, God, how many books is it now, John?
This is I mean, probably close to 60. I've lost count. 50 something, high 50s, you know.
Huge number. And we've
Huge
been
number. A lot of books.
We've been fortunate enough to talk to John about most of them. And he used to come and see us live, and I haven't given up hope that we'll get him back.
Maybe one day.
Maybe one of these days. Jesse has also, in fact, been with us for his early books before fatherhood derailed him. And Jesse is a playwright, acknowledged and award-winning playwright. But if you are on his social media list, you'll now know that he has dived deeply into the graphic novel world. So,
That's
Jesse,
right.
how did that happen?
How did that happen? So so for context, I just about 6 weeks ago put out the first of what will be a 10-issue series, a comic book called Self-Help, which is published by Image, and it is co-written with one of my oldest friends, Owen King. Owen is a terrific writer. He's someone I've known for about 20 years. And how we met is actually interesting. I was living in New York. We were both living in New York at the time, and I was wandering around in Barnes and Noble, which is something that people used to do, wander around bookstores when there were bookstores besides yours, Barbara, left standing. And I wandered over to the display table, and Owen's book was sitting out. I said, "Oh, that looks funny, and that looks interesting." I picked it up, and he turned out to be an amazing writer with amazing chops. And I just emailed him through his website, because this is the thing you could do back in 2003. You could reach out to people through the internet, and it was not yet weird or seemed like stalker behavior. I said, "Hey, we should be friends and we should get a beer." And that's what happened. And we've been friends ever since. But we haven't ever written anything together. We were sort of casting about for some project to give us an opportunity to spend more time writing. And Owen had just come off working on a TV show. He was working on the TV adaptation of his dad's book, The Stand. So he didn't want to do a TV show. He said, "What about a comic? I've done a few comics." And I, having never done a comic, said, "Sure, that sounds like fun. Why don't we give it a try?" And so the rest is sort of history. We were connected very quickly to the publisher at Image, who connected us to a wonderful artist in Italy who's done all the inks. And we just couldn't be more pleased with I actually have a copy I put here so you can see how beautiful some of the art is. It's a California noir, so sort of within my wheelhouse. But being a comic book, it gives us an opportunity to sort of heighten reality and push things out to the margins a tiny bit. And we're just having a ton of fun with it.
How wonderful. Well, I'm looking forward to acquiring a copy. So Jesse wrote 4 novels on his own, in addition to plays and so forth. And the Pot Boiler, which I think was the last one, wasn't it? Before fatherhood intervened, was nominated for an Edgar for Best Novel. I'm a big fan of Jesse's standalone work, but then he and Jonathan wrote some books together, and currently they are writing this series, the Clay Edison series. Now, I want to tell you guys that since my brother-in-law died, my brother and I have been the executors of an unbelievably complicated estate, which involves selling a New York City co-op. And I thought of you when I read this book, you're dealing with California real estate, but I'm not sure there's any real estate model more tortuous than a New York City.
Probably not.
We used to own one. Trust me, I know.
Anyway, so being an executor is a huge responsibility. It's a fiduciary responsibility. It's an emotional responsibility, a lot going on. And I mention that because that is kind of the lead into the case that we're talking about here in the Lost Coast. So why don't one of you give us some background on Clay Edison for those who haven't met him before?
Well,
I
mean,
yeah, go ahead. No.
I just want to talk about the genesis of how the series started.
Okay.
And how he became. I had always been fascinated by the concept of the coroner's investigator, the CIs, how they come, unlike in TV where they send a pathologist out, that's quite rare. They usually, in Southern California, where I'm from, they're civilians. Often they're ex-cops or ex-social workers or nurses. And you know, the old thing that the police own the case, but the coroner owns the body. So the police can't even touch a body until the CI comes and clears it. And I was amazed that no one had ever written, to my knowledge, a novel about these people. And I thought their job was so cool. And I was writing Delaware, and Jesse and I had collaborated on a couple of other books. So I thought maybe we should take a look at that. So I had this whole notion of what this was going to be. And then we decided to do it up in Northern California where Jesse lives, and we learned it's totally different. And Jesse will tell you about that.
Right. So when it comes to death investigation, which is what the first few books of the series deal with, there are a few rules. From place to place, you have very different systems. Some places have a coroner model, some places have a medical examiner model, and the names, the titles can mean different things in different places. Essentially, what you're looking at is the role of the person who comes out to the scene of a death that is in some way suspicious or unusual, and they are there to make a determination ultimately of what is the manner of death. The manner of death is not the same thing as the cause of death. The cause of death is the proximate thing that caused a person to die. So drowning or blunt force trauma or, decapitation or whatever, what have you, ranging from all that nefarious stuff all the way down to things that are much more benign. The manner of death is a legal judgment, and there's 5 categories. A death can either be homicide, suicide, accidental, undetermined, or natural. And that determination exists to enable the justice system to engage with death in a meaningful and consistent way. So if the coroner or the medical examiner's office ultimately doesn't rule that something is a homicide, it's very hard for the police to investigate it, if not impossible for the police to investigate it as a homicide. So they play an enormously important role. Up here in Northern California, where we set the series in Alameda County, I live in Berkeley, which is in the East Bay. The coroners are sheriffs. They belong to the sheriff's department out here. They used to be civilians like they are in Los Angeles, but those functions were merged into the sheriff's department about 15 years ago. So when I started to do research for our series, I found myself hanging out and talking to a lot of law enforcement and a lot of sheriffs. One interesting thing about this job, and something that makes them different from most law enforcement officers, is that they also play a sort of pastoral role with the next of kin. So one of their duties is to inform next of kin when somebody dies. So if somebody is a suicide, very often the coroner's investigators are the ones who are going to go to that person's house and break the bad news to them. And so they carry not only do they carry a sort of legal responsibility, they carry a tremendous psychological and emotional responsibility. And I think the interplay between those two ways of being, a cop and a counselor, was what interested us about the role. Now, Clay is and was a coroner's investigator for the first part of this series. Over the first 4 books, we got him into increasingly hot water with his superiors by giving him sort of a lot of extracurricular activities. And those books the first 4 books of the series, which are Crime Scene at Measure of Darkness, Half Moon Bay, and The Burning, he gets progressively looser with the rules, such that in this book, The Lost Coast, on the first page, we learn that Clay has left the department and he is now out on his own. And Barbara, to speak to your point, one of the case that he walks into in this case is to help a young man who's been assigned to be the executor of his grandmother's estate, sort through what appears to be simple but strange transactions sort of sitting on the ledger. And from there, things really balloon out of control, and he uncovers something much darker and much more sinister.
Right. But, being a executor, some people can slough it off. Sometimes they're court appointed because there's nobody named. All kinds of things can happen. But the reason your book works is that this young man is a really conscientious executor. He could have just sort of blown it off, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But he's not willing to do that. And if he hadn't decided to dig into it, this whole unfolding story would not have actually happened.
Well, I think right. Good fiction depends upon motivated, somewhat compulsive people. Blasé is the enemy of fiction. I don't like those old novels where they're in a British castle. Oh, there's a dead body on the floor. Death is pretty serious stuff, and the best detectives are those who are impelled and compelled to act. So our guys like that here, and so is Clay.
Yeah.
And along the way, Clay, I have to say, I'm just so proud of this book. This book was a hard book to write, and a lot of suffering went into this book, and we're so happy the way this came out. I think it's one of the best books we've ever written, either of us and singly. I'm so pleased with it. It's got so much depth and a new character to work along with Clay, as I'm sure you've seen. So
So who's the new character, Jesse?
So I'm going to try to dodge some spoilers here, but one thing that my dad and I have talked about a little is that when Clay was operating as a coroner, he was operating in the context of a bureaucracy, a system, and he was surrounded by all of these other people who made for a really interesting cast of characters. It was the first 4 books really we tried to embrace and delve into that tapestry of who are the other people in this office, who is the support staff, who are all the cops he's having contact with, and to show the sort of network of how law and death investigation spreads out. Clay being
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, just he's a private citizen now, and he's a little bit more in the model of the classic gumshoe books that my dad and I love so much.
Well, me too. Yeah, you're in Ross McDonald territory, kind of.
That very much. I mean,
so.
Ross McDonald has a very deep influence on my dad. He's a very deep influence on me, and we really try to lean into that while still keeping Clay. And in the course of this investigation, he runs into another PI, who, the minute we started to create her, she just sort of exploded off the page, to the extent that we said, you know what? She's there for life. Like we can't get rid of this person anymore. She brings so much incredible humor and energy to the page, and we're currently at work on the next book, and she's playing a big role in that too. So I'm really excited for people to meet her, because she's so delightful.
I have to give credit where credit's due. Jesse created this person. He was the God who created this person. So I can't take any credit for it, but she's fabulous. Fabulous. We love her.
You've written some really good female characters, John. I mean, Alex and his crew are the ones that consistently, carry the weight in your books. But I'm very fond of a couple of your books, well, more than one, where you've got a female.
I've tried. What inspired me there was Faye, actually. I remember the late, great Brian Garfield, one of the great writers. And he said, no woman writer writes men better than Faye. She really writes men well. I think part of it, she grew up with brothers, and also she's a very atypical woman. She's outwardly extremely beautiful and feminine, but she just she was a math science, so she went to school with mostly guys, and she just understood men very, very well. And so I thought, well, let me see if I can do that with women. And I think I've been able to do it. It took a while to learn how to do it, but that's the whole thing. When people feel this whole cultural appropriation baloney that you should only write what you do. I mean, being a novelist, the fun is writing about all kinds of people. I don't want to be limited to 75-year-old guys, So you want to think you could write about anybody. And I do appreciate your comments. And I think part of it is that I happen to like women. So we don't have to do the old, Madonna, evil woman dichotomy type of thing. I just see them as people. And in addition to Jesse, I have 3 daughters. And when Jesse went to college, he was the oldest. I lived in the estrogen palace, so it was fantastic.
Right. Is the dog female too?
She is.
Yep,
and our assistant and our housekeeper. I was really the only guy there. Now I have 7 grandsons and 5 granddaughters. This is the first time the guys are outnumbering the girls, basically.
Wonderful. Well, you've held your own, Jen. So
yeah.
that's really good. So scripturally speaking, thrillers are many books anyway, not just thrillers. Start out with a murder, with a body on the page up at the beginning and all, and it rolls from there. But, many classic PI stories, maybe even most classic PI stories don't start that way. They really start with something that is like an instigator for a plot where you have to keep pulling the threads and moving forward and trying to figure out what happens. So in this case, grandmother isn't murdered, she died. Right.
Yeah.
Well, at least that's what we think has happened. She's died, and here is her grandson being conscientious and entirely puzzled. So what's puzzling him, Jesse? What is it that has got him coming to Clay?
Well, before I answer that, I want to say that no, you're 100% right that this is the kind of book where we're peeling back layer after layer. And I think especially because the first 4 books, there are so many dead bodies in the first 4 books because of what Clay does. There's just a tremendous amount of death. And I think that we really wanted to flip that on its head a little bit, which is not to say that things don't get very serious, because they get extremely serious. But this takes it a little bit different. And the fact of the matter is that when Clay was a coroner, he had a reason to be dealing with a lot of dead bodies. Now he's a private investigator, and as most private investigators will tell you, that is not a typical day at the office. Most of the time, frankly, they're doing what they do from a desk, from in front of a computer, especially now that you can get so much information so quickly and so powerfully. So the grandson of the woman who has passed away, who hires Clay to review the files, as you say, he is a conscientious person, and he's really motivated by love. He's going far above the letter of the law in how he decides to comb through his grandmother's records. It is also true that this series is set up in Northern California, and we deal with a lot of Silicon Valley type of people. And that is, in fact, how Clay makes the introduction to this individual through a Silicon Valley guy from a previous novel. And the grandson himself is a Silicon Valley guy. So he's a very math and detail-oriented guy. And when he's reviewing his grandmother's finances, he starts to notice a pattern of repeated payments to something he just cannot identify. She's writing checks every month after month for years to something, and he cannot figure out what it is. He cannot, and it adds up to, over the course of her lifetime, $40,000 or $50,000, which for her is, for this person, is a tremendous amount of money. But I think for him, more importantly, it's the principle of the matter. It's the idea that someone was sucking money out of my family member, and that really bothers me. It's the principle that gets him going and inspires him to inspire Clay.
So if we're living in an age of internet fraud, I got another phishing one today. I get them all the time, but fortunately I have a stop called Rob, my husband, who you both know. And whenever I get an email that is a surprise, I send it to Rob. And so far my record's 100%. I haven't opened one. Yay.
Yeah.
But some of them are incredibly plausible. The one today
Totally.
came with an invoice and all this other stuff,
yeah.
you know, and,
Yeah.
and I can see how people could get sucked in, you know, by that. So there are various kinds of frauds, but the one you're talking about can't really be an internet fraud because this has been going on for way too long. And grandma would not have been subject to the kind of stuff that your bank is now. I got an email from the bank today saying, you know, pay attention, don't open that, whatever. That wouldn't have been
Yeah.
her reality, would it?
No, and unfortunately,
it's old fashioned. And you know, we talk about the death thing. Yeah, the previous books were front loaded with death because it's a coroner. This has plenty of death, but it's all backloaded, you know,
Yeah.
tremendously suspenseful denouement. And so things just build gradually. What looks like a fraud that morphs into something else, which morphs into something else, which morphs into something else. And it's quite a serpentine plot.
Yeah.
You know, there has to be big money involved somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, if grandma's contributions were, you know, were small, but large considering her own financial situation.
Right. It's all relative, right?
Yep. Yeah, well, absolutely. And I like that so much about the grandson, that he wasn't, the fact that it wasn't a lot of money was not at stake for him.
And he's an affluent guy. He's a Silicon Valley guy with a ton
Right.
of
He
money.
could have just brushed it aside.
Could have brushed it aside, but it really was he's a principled person. Yeah.
And as Clay says to him in the book, you know, one of the issues is that there really is no will on the part of law enforcement to prosecute financial crimes below a certain threshold. It's just a sad fact of life, particularly in California, that we have come to accept a certain amount of financial crime as just a fact of life.
Okay, guys, so you're going to be really proud of me because I'm going to tell you a short story, which is there is a predatory ring of plaintiff and defense attorneys that have taken the American Disability Act in 1990 when it was really aimed at physical spaces and translated it to the internet. And so one day in February, the Poison Pen and 3 other bookstores that I've said I would not discuss were all hit by the same predatory plaintiff, who actually probably is some guy being paid $500 a throw by the lawyer for a violation of the ADA Act, saying that they were not able to complete a sale on the internet. Part of the reason I love this is that he didn't even have the right email address. I mean, the right URL for the internet, but that's not the point. Anyway, and before we even knew that this lawsuit had been filed, before we were ever served, I heard from 6 different defense firms saying, oh, you know, you've been sued in the Southern District of New York by so-and-so for a violation, whatever. We're here to defend you. Now, you know, I haven't been in the realm of practicing law for a really long time, but I was not happy to get this. And so I thought about it for a while. And eventually we got served, and I read the pleadings and I thought, no. So I contacted the American Booksellers Association. There's really not much they can do. And of course, everybody's afraid of looking badly, you know, if they're standing up against ADA. But I'm a person who lived in a wheelchair for 2 years with no thought that I would ever get out of it. So I'm not a really good target for people who say I don't understand that. So anyway, I ended up hiring, for all of us, I persuaded the rest of them to stick with me, an attorney in New York City who said to me, you know, this is only going to work if you're going to go the distance, because if you agree to settle, you have to sign an NDA, which is a gag order. And that's how these guys get away with it. They frighten people with no legal experience into thinking that it will cost them enormous sums. In truth, it doesn't cost you as much to pay the lawyer if you're doing it right as your settlement would be. So it's not really going to be a financial.
Yeah, there's so much skullduggery.
Right. But anyway, you have to agree to go the distance on this, and everybody else was wavering, but this is me, right? So we went back and forth, and we, you know, filed stuff and we did other stuff. And 4 days ago, my attorney wrote to me, all of us, and said, congratulations. They said you went the distance, and not only has this case been dismissed, but it's been dismissed with prejudice, so they can't come in.
Beautiful. Good for you.
Good for you.
Good for you.
And
Barbara.
then he said to me, you're the only person, he said, in the course of doing this, who has ever been willing to stand your ground. And
yeah, because for most people, it's not worth the stress. It's not, I mean, money aside, it's
that's hell. I was really happy at the idea of going to New York and trying this.
You were motivated.
You know, and unfortunately, I'm surrounded.
You're the exception. You're the
My
exception.
husband
I mean,
will back me up. My staff will back me up. You know, the whole bit. I mean, I can't. The thing is, if you understand how this works, there is zero chance that you will ever get past a deposition. They will never agree to be deposed, because if they are deposed, they're either going to commit perjury or they're going to have to explain how this scam works. And there's no way that they would ever actually go before a jury in the Southern District of New York.
You're calling their bluff, basically. And it's
but you really do have to stand your ground, but you also have to understand that if you agree to settle, not only are you, here's the thing that makes a big difference also. All of this got going before there was stuff called crowdsourcing, Kickstarter, whatever. If you sign an NDA, you are not then going to be able to go out and do fundraising to cover the legal fees.
I know.
If you don't, you can. So my current goal, since I get past another week of intense events, probably going to run 2 crowdsourcing campaigns. One to recoup the money for the Poison Pen and share it with the other bookstores, one of whom would go under if actually had to pay the legal fees. And the other is to do probably a Kickstarter to create a fund where small businesses who are in fact sued can go to either ABA or someplace and draw on those funds, because if enough people stand their ground, it'll eventually have to stop.
That's great.
Yep. So anyway, I was really pleased by your characters in this, who were, you know, like me.
Yeah. But you know what, for every one of you, right? How many dozens of people are just going to roll over because they're right? They're frightened, and in the book, that's how this scam works, right?
Exactly.
It hinges on the idea that people are terrified of the legal system. They're ignorant about their rights. Right, and they just mostly want to put it behind them. They just want to put stress behind them.
Well, it's a cost benefit analysis, you know.
Totally. But it allows it, you know, that kind of thing. It allows the bad actors to do what they're doing again and again and again. And also, you know, I think that there's an important thing in the book, right? You know, because our scheme starts 40 years ago and it's analog, right? And people who are older, these people can't connect and find each other, right? And that's a key thing, right? With any sort of, right, you have to prevent the victims from being able to get together and share and pool their information. And so that's something that the people in our novel do extremely well.
Yep.
And the interesting thing about this book, although it's triggered by all this, it still moves into the psychodynamics of very disturbed families, psychopathy, evil. It's a very scary book. Faye was reading it in manuscript. She goes, "This one is really suspenseful," and that's from a professional novelist. It's really a page-turning, suspenseful book. It just goes to so many interesting places, and it's set in a very interesting part of California, the West Coast. That you know, it's this region. Well, Jesse, describe it. I mean, you live closer to there than I, but it really is a lost coast. It's the highway veering away from the ocean, going inland and then veering back, and you know, impassable roads. And go ahead, Jess. Say more.
Well, so this region of Northern California. So people know California. They think of Los Angeles. They think of the San Francisco Bay Area. They sort of forget about the top third of the state, which is a really big chunk of land up there. And there's a lot of weird stuff happening up there because it is so remote, because it is so sparsely populated. that's where a lot of strange things take place. It's where Humboldt County for years is where the marijuana, so the Green Triangle was located, where the sort of the marijuana growing industry was located. And so when they were building Pacific Coast Highway, which, as you're aware, runs all the way from Mexico up to Canada, there's this stretch right around Humboldt where the coast itself becomes way too difficult to build on. The land is too like wobbly and corrugated. The soil is poor. So rather than attempt to put the highway along the ocean, which is what it does the rest of the time, they just sort of bowed inward for about 70 or 80 or 100 miles. And as a result, there's this stretch of coast where there's just nothing. And I think we were really intrigued by that because there are few kinds of real estate more valuable than California coastline. That is an extremely valuable thing. And the idea that you would have this huge chunk of it that was essentially empty of people and completely undeveloped and completely wild was fascinating to us. As it happens, there really is only one town along this whole stretch, and it's not, we have a fictional town. There's some similarity to this, but what that real town hasn't, that real town is a place that has like 700-800 people. Ours is a much more extreme version of that. It is that, but with all the weirdness amplified, 100-fold.
Exactly. Well, you talk about the highway, and I just happen to be writing a passage in the book that I'm working on now. I do have a house in Malibu, and right above us is this road. And this road used to not be a road. We're like among the last beaches in Malibu. Then it's State Park for 15, 20 miles. And there used to be mountains blocking it off. And a woman named Mrs. Ringe owned all of Malibu, and she tried to hold on to it, and the state got most of it away from her. But you couldn't get through. So initially, they built a little, like a pathway for almost impassable for walking and bicycles right around the ocean. And then people kept dying. It was known as Blood on the Rocks Road. People just kept dying. And finally, in 1937, during the Depression era, when Roosevelt was doing all these WPA things, they found like 170 tons of surplus dynamite from World War I, and they just blew up this mountain and created the continuation of Pacific Coast Highway. So this could have been a lost coast too. You just couldn't get through except on the inland routes. And that was try to get that done today, dynamiting a mountain.
No kidding. That's an amazing
it's
story.
fascinating. Yeah, and I don't live far from there. It's one of the first roads in America created with dynamite.
Well, when I was an undergraduate at Stanford, we would drive to Los Angeles for Disneyland opening.
Sure.
But at one point, my father was doing business in Los Angeles, and we had a timeline to get there. But it was a beautiful day, so we went down the 101. And when you get to above, what is it, Saratoga, you can turn to go, over to Highway 1 and drive down Monterey, and you go all the way down.
It's beautiful.
And right below Big Sur, a huge landslide occurred.
Yeah.
There is no way to do anything, but you turn around and drive all the way back until you get back to El Camino Real, and I think it's Saratoga, because there are no roads that, go through that strange mountain.
So up north, where the marijuana grows are, and the serial killers are lurking, and all the evil people, and the Hells Angels, and the cartels have marijuana plants there. That is still cut off, and I don't want to say too much about it because it's such a fascinating sense of place. But when you have a place like that, all kinds of things can and do happen.
I think the one thing I read is that when you have these towns, as Barbara, as you say, like there's one way in, there's one way out, right? Yeah. Like that's it. And so what it does in terms of a setting and in terms of atmosphere, it effectively makes the whole town into a locked room mystery. Right. It's like a locked room mystery, but on the scale of an entire place. Because like once you go in there, you ain't coming out, and unless you can sort of fight your way out. And I think that sense of claustrophobia also sort of amps up the attention, the suspense for Clay.
And it's a fascinating book. Sometimes things just evolve in a way that surprises the authors. Obviously, there's part of this classic PI thing, but I think the book also takes on the feeling of a classic Western. Stranger rides into town, like
exactly
High
right.
Plains Drifter, Clint Eastwood. Stranger rides into town. You can just imagine guys in the saloon turning around and looking. It has some of that same quality, and that's really scary when you're a stranger in a strange land.
Yeah.
So the book takes on a lot of different flavors and goes a lot of different
But we're
places.
not going to talk about the actual fraud engine that drives the story, although
we didn't want to say too much about it.
No, I don't want to do that because, the reader is clearly going to figure out that you're not writing this book because grandma was writing checks to the Humane Society or something.
Exactly.
But I thought you evolved it extremely well. And as Jesse has pointed out, and John too, the suspense keeps building. And, and it starts out looking like, this is just kind of a very simple, not dangerous kind of a case, but it ends up with a bang. So that's great. So you took Clay out of the coroner's department in order to give him more freedom to operate without the bureaucracy.
Yeah,
behind
exactly.
him. Is he going to?
He had just, we didn't really think it through. He just, look, to be an interesting guy, you can't be a bureaucrat. So he was always that individualistic guy stretching the boundaries and doing other things. He wasn't a bad cop by any means. He was a great cop, but too individualistic to just be a bureaucrat, which is what a coroner's department, any official department, is bureaucracy. You have to get past that. And we just felt that this was the right time to break him out. But yet he still has his contacts at the coroner's office. So that makes him a very adroit private investigator.
Well, there are big parts of California that are really the sheriff's department is the law enforcement operation. I mean, you have to have a city with a certain. I think San Francisco is if I remember right, the only county that has both a police department and a sheriff's department. It's
all sheriffs are in the unincorporated areas, the rural areas.
Well, John Lasquare pointed that out because one of his books about San Francisco, required that particular structure. So, are there, I mean, you can create some conflict if there are hard feelings in other sheriff's departments or whatever, for him leaving.
But he still has those contacts and he still has the knowledge. So he's, I mean, some PIs are ex-cops, not all, but some are, and I have several friends who are PIs, and the ones who are ex-cops take a different approach and take different types of cases. But he's just a skillful guy, and I think just a very appealing person, and a very also morally driven person.
So you're obviously having a good time doing this together. Has there ever been any tension, Jesse, in this father-son dynamic?
So tell him the truth.
No, honestly, no. So I think, we both bring to this collaboration we're both coming with a couple important things in mind. The first is that our relationship preceded this collaboration, and our relationship will exist after this collaboration. This collaboration is a small part of a much longer, lifelong father-son relationship, which is the more important thing, and the thing we want to preserve. So that's number one. Number two is that my father has obviously published many books. I've published fewer, but still enough books that I don't think either of us are coming to the table to prove anything or to sort of toot our own horn. What we want to do is tell the best story possible, and everything we do is in service of that. So there really is a sense of egolessness and gratitude for the fact that your collaborator is someone who's so skilled and is going to come up with amazing ideas. I don't begrudge my dad the right to come up with a better idea. I'm like, great, that's fantastic. I never would have thought of that. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. And I think that because I have a background in theater, I have a background in collaborative arts. I collaborate on this comic book with Owen. I get a real kick out of playing in the band and hearing the other people solo and standing next to somebody who's just really admirable.
I appreciate it, and vice versa. The key to collaboration, I do use the musical analogy. Both of us are guitarists, and Jesse the drummer also, and both of us played in bands. And the key is to play with people with chops, with good talent. Otherwise, it's dismal. If you're playing in a band with someone who's not good, it's horrible. So Jesse was already a notable bestseller before he began writing with me. It wasn't just nepotistic thing of give the kid a job. You know, he was a successful guy, and we just fell into collaboration. The only other person I've ever collaborated with since college, where I did a lot of collaboration, was Faye. And Faye and I did a couple of novellas, you know, a couple of volumes each with 2 novellas, and we had fun. And then we decided we weren't going to do it anymore, not because there was any tension. Simply, we had so many other projects to do. So, but the same thing I learned collaborating with Faye, and Jesse learned in theater. He was an actor, he was a director, he really was involved, and a playwright. And you have to approach it totally differently from your solo novel. Your solo novel is like your child. You get very, very protective. But even there, you have to be open-minded and take criticism, reasonable criticism, editing, although I don't get a lot. But when you're collaborating, you have to understand it's a team. And you have to take your ego and park it in the closet, which is a good thing for a relationship too. I've been married for 52 years, and that's what it takes. See yourself as part of a dyad. Doesn't mean you lose your identity. In fact, it can strengthen your identity. A good relationship can strengthen your identity. But you really have to approach it from, I'm working with another person. And as Jesse said, it's quite comforting, because like Faye always said when we were collaborating, if I had something I'm like in a corner, I just email it over to John. And the funny thing is, Faye and I live in the same house, and when we collaborated, we never had a face-to-face meeting ever. Everything was email from her office to my office, and that really helped. Jesse lives in a different city. Now, the key to writing a novel, I'm sure you hear this from a lot of other writers, is planning. So, I mean, we spend much more time, at least as much, probably more time, planning the book than actually writing it. Both of us are fairly fluent writers, but we don't start till we really know where we're going, within limits, because there's still that creativity of each day you surprise yourself. But it's like building a house, you need a foundation. So, you know, it's just a matter of, we spend a lot of time, people say, how do you collaborate? That's a question we always get. And we just do a lot of discussion, a lot of phone calls, a lot of face-to-face me. I'll fly up there, he'll fly down here, we get on the phone, and we just talk it out. And he'll think of something, he'll say, what do you think of this? And we do that for months and months and months and months. And then when it's ready, then we start writing. Jesse generally does first draft, and then I will take it and monkey with it and send it back and forth. And we keep sending it back and forth until we're happy, which in our case takes a long time. I thought I was a perfectionist till I worked with my son. He raises perfectionism and meticulousness to a whole new level.
Well, here you both are. So Jesse, I'm gathering there is another book in the Clay Edison book in the works, right?
Yeah.
Are you,
Yes.
in addition to writing your collaboration with Owen King and your dad, are you thinking at some point of writing another solo book?
Very much. So we have 2 more Clay books on contract. The comic book is mostly written at this point. We have 1 issue to write, but comic books are very easy to write because they're 22 pages, and that's all you get. 22 pages, about 6 panels a page. That's it. You can write them in about 3-4 days if you're very determined. So yeah, I have a number of other projects in the works. I have a nonfiction project I'm sort of monkeying with. I have a historical novel I've had on the back burner for 20 years, which really, like, that's a thing probably when we write the last Clay book on this contract, that's probably what I'll spend some time working on, because I have all of this research, you know, and sort of I'm itching to get started on that. I mean, the thing is that, like, writing a book is very exhausting, and I do not find that I have the capacity to switch gears easily within a given day. So when I'm working on the book, I'm just working on the book. If I want to stop to finish a comic book issue, I really have to take a week or two off from the book. And I think it would be very hard for me to do that with 2 novels. With a comic, it's easy because 3-4 days, it's done. I can go back to working on the book. But novels are, as my dad said, you're all in, particularly a solo novel. It's very absorbing. And you almost need an uninterrupted train of thought for 18 months, which with 5 children is very difficult to achieve. So that's sort of the lay of the land. And we're having a ton of fun with Clay is the other thing. So like I don't want to just leave him because we're having so much fun with him.
Yeah.
All right. Well, never say never in the world of publishing.
No,
on,
never.
Too many things. So, John, do you have a book coming in February? You've been
I
like,
do. I do.
such a regular.
I have 2 Delaware novels completed.
Yay.
I had the Ghost Orchid, which came out in February. Next February is a book called Open Season, which is done. I just saw the cover proof. It looks great. And I have another one finished called Jigsaw. That's coming out in 26. And the book I'm working on now is coming out in 27.
Wow, he has a great work ethic. Well, good news for me.
I don't think
because
I'm such a. I like it. I'm a lazy guy. People don't believe me. I first of all, I don't have kids in the house anymore, so I have a lot more time. But the interesting is how much writing saps your creativity. For example, you've been to my house and you know I love to paint, and it's actually what I do best. I mean, that's what I was like a child prodigy artist painter, and I love to paint. But when I write, I cannot paint. There's no energy for it. And I asked a guy named Antonio Damasio, who's like a Nobel quality neuroscientist years ago. I said, Antonio, why can't I paint? Why don't I have energy to paint? He says, because when you're writing, you're probably painting pictures in your brain. You're using visual centers to write your novels, and you're just wiping out the neurons. So the other thing I like to do is play classical guitar. But even that, now that I'm working on the book and I'm putting hours into working on the book, it's just harder to get mobilized to do anything creative other. So it's quite engrossing and quite captivating in the literal sense that you're a captive of this project. And it's also, as opposed to, as Jesse says, as opposed to writing a comic book or writing an op-ed column or an essay, it's a long process. Takes us about a year, and some people it takes longer. So it's just a long, there's not instant gratification other than the day-to-day thing where you say, hey, I think I wrote a good page today, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I can hope that you and I will meet either on Zoom or in person. What a concept. Again, in February. I know.
Absolutely.
I'm not giving up on the thought that one day.
I'm thrilled with these books. I'm thrilled with both the Delawares. I mean, it was kind of a COVID thing. I was very creative during COVID. I painted a lot and I wrote a lot because I was locked up. You know?
Right. Now, that's so interesting. Some writers were really stifled by COVID, their creativity. Other people, I remember talking to Ian Rankin. He said he got projects done he thought about for years.
Ian's a creative guy. No, my editor told me, she goes, John, you're the only guy who's having fun in COVID. Everyone else is clamming up and having a nervous breakdown. You're just writing away. So I don't know, what else am I going to do? You know?
Well, that's true. I think it was a very individual experience. Everybody depending on, living situation, family situation, so
Definitely.
we were fortunate in Arizona that while we didn't stay open to the public, we all could go to work. And Zoom came along at a magical moment. So actually our business grew a lot during COVID.
Oh yeah, I'll bet. Yeah. Well, I was lucky, even prior to COVID, I worked at home and Faye worked at home. We have a nice place and we have a bit of room. So we didn't feel cooped up. We have a fairly large property. And there were times prior to COVID where I didn't leave the house for 3-4 days. Because I would, why? I had everything there. And I used to feel guilty. Like, what's wrong with you? You're a shut-in. So then when COVID came, it felt natural. And what I did is I would, every day around 12/1, I would take one of my cars out and drive around in the mountains and take a recreational drive. And there wasn't a lot of traffic, so it was really awesome. But ironically, I probably got out more in that sense during COVID than I had prior. So
Very true.
it was a big change for us. I'm not minimizing it, but I'm really cognizant of the fact that it was less difficult for us than for other people.
It's funny because, right, COVID was obviously a different experience having little kids in the house because everybody's in the house.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that in the Clay series, so the Clay series sort of like is different from the Delaware series in that we actually like move him through time and he gets older and we've moved him through different phases of life. And there's a lot of reference to sort of real life events, but we just deleted COVID from that timeline. We just skipped it. We just did not want to deal with it. It was just, that was one of the few real bends with reality that we made in this literary world. The COVID never happened, or at least nobody ever refers to it. And honestly, it's just because I think we were just so sick of it by that point. We were so sick of it defining so many things about our lives. And we said, you know what? It's not going to be interesting for us to write about that.
When I first figured out that I'm doing a Delaware series, which took a few books, you never know you're writing a series. You never know you're getting published. You write one, oh, it becomes a bestseller. Wow, that's crazy. I'll do another one. Okay, it keeps happening. I'll keep doing it. So then you realize you are doing a series and you have to really say, how am I going to do it? And I decided not to age him in real time. I decided to create kind of a timeless, almost dreamlike, surreal quality of Delaware. Now, things have to change. In the early books, he's using a payphone. So that anachronistic you cannot be. You have to adapt to some extent. But I've really avoided dealing with any current events. Anything, any COVID, any wars or anything. This is just the dream world of Alex Delaware and Milo Sturgis. And it's, I think, the longest running crime series in America. Certainly, you may know another series, but I mean, this is the 39th Delaware book, and the next one would be the 40th. And I think it's worked because I find that as a novelist, I want to take you out of reality. I want to entertain you. I want you to escape in my book, in our book, and have a pleasurable experience that takes you away from reality. So I try to avoid reality as much as I can.
But I think readers are more than happy to go along with it because if you, who was I just talking to? Brad Thor, Sunday night, we did his book launch, and the question came up again about whether Scott Harvath was being aged, and the truth is he wouldn't be able to do any of his daring do. If he'd been aged in real time, he'd be about 80 years old and riding a desk if he weren't retired at the CIA. But as it is,
I wrote the first Delaware novel, we were the same age. Now he's still the same age, and I'm 75 years old. Nobody wants to see a 75-year-old guy.
I mean, it's not so much doesn't want to see him, but credibly, I mean, look at what we just went through, with Joe Biden and talking about his age and all. Readers would have the same conversation, No,
I just don't want to. It's all about fantasy. We are selling fantasy.
Right.
But in a great way. I mean, I want people to really be captivated and taken away from the everyday stress.
Okay, it is fantasy, John, but it is still grounded in reality.
Exactly.
For sure. So
exactly.
For sure. I mean, we always want to be tethered to reality. There's nothing supernatural about these books.
That's what's tricky. We're always walking a knife edge.
Right.
Always walking a knife edge.
And
it's the same thing.
I think actually like a lot of those details, like how does this scam work? How does law enforcement work? And what are the parameters? Those are, to me, are really, really interesting things. I think because we consume, in addition to consuming a lot of fiction, we consume a lot of nonfiction, we consume a lot of true crime, things like that. And so, I mean, the value and beauty of fiction is, as you said earlier, it allows you to step out of yourself. It allows you to be someone else. It allows you to project. It allows you to push into the margins a little bit and do something a little bit different. But we bring a certain set of rules and expectations to the page. People know that Clay is not going to grow wings and fly, right? So like how you establish those rules over the course of a series is a really interesting thing. And as my dad said, you often don't know what the rules are when you're starting out. But with Delaware, right? Delaware, now we know, because you can look back and retrospectively say, okay, this is the world of Delaware. With Clay, it was the same kind of thing. We had to figure out, okay, is he going to age? How fast is he going to age? How much is this going to map to reality? What are we going to keep and what are we going to leave out? And those I think are like really difficult but really interesting questions to wrestle with as a writer.
Well, I think you've done it magnificently. Patrick, come and join us, because I realize that we've kept John and Jesse here for an hour, and maybe people would like to ask questions.
Thanks, Barbara.
Yes, indeed. Well, I have a question for John. Are you still playing the oud?
Yeah. When I have energy, I play. I play classical guitar, other types of guitar, oud, a little bit of viola da gamba. Love to play music. Anything with strings, I like to play.
At this point, is there any guitar or stringed instrument that you're currently looking for?
No, I have I have so many instruments, and I don't want it to look like a hoarder's palace. My guitar room is a very beautiful place, and it's I'm kind of an OCD neat freak guy, so everything has to look perfect. And the philosophy is if something comes in, something goes out. So I bought one guitar a couple of years ago because it was a very collectible, wonderful instrument that was related to another instrument, but I sold one to make room for it. So that's it.
Wow.
So I'm really concentrated on playing more than collecting at this point.
Right. Okay, let's see. Okay, yeah, Renee would like to know, Jesse, is your wife a writer too?
Yes, my wife has published a book. It's not fiction; it is nonfiction. My wife is she's a business executive, and she works in the sort of wellness and mental health space. And she earlier was last year, published a book also in collaboration with Marty Seligman, one of the world's preeminent psychologists, about sort of wellness and work skills and positivity in the workplace, which is her area of expertise. So that was really cool to get her galleys in the mail and to see her doing a lot of speaking. And I got to tag along with her and be the spouse rather than the person on the stage.
Give a title, plug a title.
Yes, this is what it is called. Thank you, Dad. Thank you. It's called Tomorrow Mind. And it's in addition to being really interesting and really helpful, it's extremely well written because she is an excellent writer.
And she's an MD. She's a doctor who then became an executive. She's a brilliant woman, our only daughter-in-law, and we adore her.
Thank you, Dad.
Now, your other daughter, is it Aliza?
I have three. I have three daughters.
But I remember one of them was here with you and Faye.
Right, the little one.
Yeah, Prism. Wasn't that the name of her novel?
Yeah, she wrote Prism as an 11th grader. She's now 31, and she lives in Austin, Texas, is married, has a kid, and is working on a novel. She's a very talented writer also.
She's a terrific writer.
But my two other daughters, Dr. Rachel Kessler and Dr. Ilana Moss, are clinical psychologists. And I'm super proud of them.
Runs in the family.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
we only do a couple things around here. So
when I met Faye, she was 18 and I was 21. And my plan was to go to Chicago. I'd gotten into US Chicago Graduate School and basically never get married at least till I was 30 and get a motorcycle and be a bachelor. And then I met Faye, and on our second date, I said, most gorgeous girl I've ever gone out with and the smartest. I go, if I married her, we could have some smart kids. And we did. So it's kind of cool.
Speaking of Faye, we've had a couple of people ask, has she kind of stopped writing for now, or
She claims she has retired. And I give her credit because she left it on top. She just wants to have a little time on her hands. Faye's been working very hard raising kids, and she got a doctorate in dentistry. She has a BA in math, and since I've known her, she's worked very hard. So whether or not she will change her mind, I don't know. But as of now, she is retired.
Let's see here. Let's see. What else do we have here? You've already answered these. Question: Are helicopters used in your new book?
Are helicopters? I don't think there's any helicopters.
I think this person probably means to get to and from this very
to get into the
to and from this very remote town. So Again, I don't want to spoil too much. I will tell you that the town that actually exists on the Lost Coast, which is a place called Shelter Cove, um, it's a tiny little town. It has a giant airstrip. And when the town was being developed, I read all about the history of this town. They built this airstrip because the road into town was so nauseating and made people so sick that the only way they could convince people to buy was they had to fly them in and skip the road. And then so they built this. It's this crazy thing because it's a tiny little giant. It's not like a little dirt airstrip. It's a big concrete. It looks like something you'd see at SFO. And in the middle of developing this place, they had a terrible airplane crash. It was so windy, and something went wrong, and a plane went off the runway and crashed, and a bunch of people died. And that was one of the things that actually like caused the development to come to a crashing halt. So it is not easy to fly around there because in addition to it being very treacherous and precarious in terms of the landform, it's incredibly windy. The wind is so strong. So, and I know because when I was doing on the ground research, I drove out to some of these places, and man, was it a sick making experience. I really like that. Many times I thought I was going to go over the side of the road. I won't answer that directly. All I'll say is read the book. You'll see what's in the town.
It's a scary place. When I talked about the highway in Malibu with dynamite, the reason why they did it is because the head of the highway patrol begged the state to do it because so many people were dying.
Yeah.
So many people were dying as they try to sidle along the mountain, and they fall into the ocean and be dashed on the rocks. So the head of the highway patrol in the 30s begged the state to do something.
That's California, right? Very beautiful and very dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Very deadly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Didn't they just have a massive earthquake in Bakersfield area?
It was in Kern County, but it was a 5.1 for us. For us, California is 5.1.
Just a little.
We lived through 6s
shake.
and 7s. Yeah. Apparently, I didn't feel it, but Faye did. Even here down in Southern California. Yeah, there's something everywhere. Everywhere you go, you look at the tornadoes and the storms in Florida and the Midwest. These tornadoes, it's just part of life. It's a scary planet, and you have to accommodate to it.
Illusion that we're in control, right?
Yeah.
I've never even had that illusion. I don't even have that illusion.
I think it's everything, you can't put yourself against it, I mean, wrong place, wrong time.
Well, look, I mean, let's face it, one thing we all do is die, but we live in denial of it. There was a sociologist named Ernest Becker, denial of death. Otherwise, why bother to do anything? So we live in that fantasy, and that's part of life, and keeping a positive attitude, which sometimes is challenging.
Yeah.
Let's see. Here's a very practical question. That'll be the last one. Do we need to read the first 4 books before we read this one?
I was going to get into that because that's part of the knife edge of writing a series. That's part of the knife edge of fiction. The answer is no. But all our series are constructed in a way you can come at any point, and then and often people get it with the new book, and then they'll go back and read. So that takes also, you have to look at 2 things. You have your loyal readers who have bought your books for years and years and years, and they deserve what I call the comfort of the familiar. But you can't make it so in-jokey that a new person is not going to get it. So that's part of the many challenges of writing a series. But no, the answer is no. And I would encourage you just to dive into this one. I'm so jazzed about. Neither Jesse nor I are good at self-promotion. That is not our forte. That's not our family's thing. None of us are big self-promoters. But this particular book, I'm so enthusiastic about it because it's just, I think
and let me say also that because we've talked about the fact that Clay has left the coroner's office and embarked upon a new life as a PI, basically, it's a great place to start.
That's right. Yeah. It's very much a pivot in the series for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I agree that I think this is a really dynamic book. I love the idea that something small turns into something enormous. And I really like the structure of procedurals. I'm sort of up to here with the domestic drama with all the twists. I don't like the idea that everybody in your life and everybody that you love is there to betray you. It's just not a comfortable way, I think. And I know it's been hugely popular and continues to be, but I really love procedurals, and I don't care.
So do I.
It's an arsonist or a coroner's guy or a PI or a cop, whatever it is. And I like the thing to move forward, although I do like cold cases, and I'm very pleased with a lot of books that, where there's a cold case and a new case. And so there is, a TikTok. Well, in a way, this is sort of a cold case. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
All those books, because we have a strong sort of like belief, a core belief as writers, right, is that past is prologue, and so almost all the books have that. They all have some thread of the past running into the present, and that's because we believe that like present actions are the result of everything that's come before, and the psychology that's built over time. That's interesting to us.
My motto as a novelist and as a psychologist has always been, you neglect the past at your own peril. So,
Even true of your dog. Right. So there we go. Well, it's been great. Oh, sorry. I have to hang up. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Barbara.
The person calling has lost somebody major in his life, and that's why I'm going to talk to him. But it's been wonderful. Thank you all very much.